So really excited for you to be joining us, Katie. Really excited to learn more about Meet Maev. So for anyone who isn't familiar with yourself or Meet Maev, do you mind just giving us the quick background on how you started this awesome company?
Yeah. I started the company officially 3 years ago, but had been thinking about it for probably the last 6 or 7 years. And the idea really kicked off when I first got a dog when I was in my early 20s and was like thinking I was one of the only young people in an apartment with a dog and with a full-time job. And it really turns your life upside down. And became obsessed with solving these like very simple pain points around having a dog in the modern world, and found that building a community of people that I could ask questions to was really helpful. There were so many things that were just really difficult, from how to fix your day-to-day routine to make sure your dog has an okay lifestyle, to like understanding some of the basic health and nutrition problems. And so it started as a community. I became a dog walker for about a year to get to know people. And eventually we found that nutrition was one of the biggest problems to solve, and then built Maev. But we launched last year. So we were in stealth for a few years, just beta testing and working with vets, and then launched officially right before the pandemic hit off.
So that's great. That's super interesting. I just want to dive into one thing really quickly. So you were a dog walker to meet other people in the dog community, kind of like build the community, and then you decided to build Meet Maev on top of kind of that experience.
Yeah, pretty much. Looking at it in retrospect, it seems like a very linear path. I was, it was not at all that way when I was doing it. I got a dog. I was working at this tech startup and was spending so many of my weekends just thinking about this like pet project of
Mhm.
like how I could build things mostly for myself to solve my own problems, and then was trying to get to know others to beta test them, and eventually quit that job because I just needed to like decompress, and thought the best way to decompress will be to dog walk and talk to these people who are just so interesting. And like, despite all of the chaos of having a wild animal in your living room, they were like, I want to do this anyway. And most of them had like roommates, friends, and family telling them not to do it, and they just did it anyway. So I spent a year hanging out with those people and dog walking in San Francisco. And then eventually it clicked that this was the thing I had to work on full time, um, after doing that for 12 months.
That's super cool. You kind of like get paid to do your initial customer research. So that's really smart. Okay.
Yeah.
So from there to today, can you just break down what Maev has become, where you are as a business now that you're now that you've become a scale D2C brand?
Yeah. We talk about Maeve as building the Glossier or the Nike of the pet aisle, building a real brand and community that has trust and um, has alignment with the values of our customers. And we think that, ironically, nothing like that has existed in the pet aisle. People don't really love their pet brands, despite how much they love their pets. So I started the company, really with that goal in mind, of like building a company that aligns with people's lifestyles enough for them to talk about it and want to be a part of it and wear it on their sleeve. We spent about 2 years beta testing, building these customer communities who are really like product co-creators with us. They tested our earliest products. They helped us with branding and content creation. Um, Really everything about the business stemmed from those early communities. And we worked with a bunch of clinical nutritionists and veterinarians to formulate the products. And then built the site and the initial visual identity of the brand, and launched. And a week later, the pandemic hit and shut down New York City,
Oof.
and we had to change gears. But we've been around for a year, have hunkered down through the pandemic, have an amazing set of customers today, and we're growing quickly.
That's really exciting. Also, it's so crazy to hear I've now had a couple of these conversations where yeah, it's like the company launched early 2020, pandemic hit. It's like, are we going to survive? And then it kind of takes the opposite route where things just go and everything starts to grow
Right.
really crazy fast. So that's really exciting to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. It has been a silver lining for sure. And luckily, our team has been able to be safe and healthy. So the fact that people are getting dogs to enrich their lives during pandemic has definitely been a tailwind for us.
Yeah, yeah, because the greatest adoption of pets in something like 20 or 30 years happened last year. So that's very exciting.
Right.
Okay, so to dive into the data and kind of what we came to talk about today, what were some of the challenges that your brand was facing that led you to be more data driven and data empowered and kind of led you to use Daasity?
Yeah. We've always thought about ourselves as half a tech company and half a consumer products company, and have always been very data driven in everything we do. And because we wanted to be data driven, we built a headless commerce store on Shopify so we could own the front end and customize everything. We have a flexible subscription model that adds in all of this complexity around like measuring retention and LTV. And by, I guess, like 6 months into our selling roadmap, by last summer, we had data in like 6 or 7 different platforms, from Shopify to our subscription tool to Google Analytics to Klaviyo to Facebook. And they were all talking, but there were these like components of data that would have a source of truth and everything else was wrong, which made it really hard to answer basic questions of like, is our new campaign performing better than the last on LTV, or is it only performing better than the last on CAC and AOV? Or like we stood up the visual identity of the brand when we first launched, and it wasn't converting very well. And so we've been running conversion experiments on the front end of the website constantly, and tracking the performance of each was really tricky because we had data in all of these different places. So I think the biggest headache was that I was one of the only people on the team who really knew where to pull the right data from. And as we've hired more and more people, that meant that I'm running all of the reporting and analytics, and I need to like check everyone's work because we just have wrong data in a bunch of platforms that you would expect to be right.
Yeah, it's almost like having a second job of
Yeah.
like, okay, we're doing all these great things. Are they working or not? Figuring out whether they're working on, doing all the analysis on the back end. So, um, are there any other pieces to the business? Anything on, like, I'm assuming that you're a frozen CP, like consumer package company. So there's probably a lot on the operational side that you all focus on as well. Was there a lot that you had to track? What was that process like?
Yeah, that's right. I like almost completely forgot that that's a whole other set of headaches. We ship frozen food on a weekly basis, and it's dog food. So if a customer is a subscriber, they cannot run out of food. Their dog needs to eat this every day, and that makes our operations really mission critical as part of our customers' experience. And tracking carrier performance has always been a huge pain point for us because that data just doesn't show up in any of those platforms that basic e-commerce stores use. It's not showing up in Google Analytics. Shopify doesn't report on it very well. And we tried a few different plugins to track carrier performance, because if a carrier has a bad week, or if there's a heat wave and UPS is late, or COVID hits and a bunch of drivers are not working, then we end up having a lot of reships, and that obviously affects the customer experience because they run out of food, and it affects our gross margins because we end up paying twice for the same box. Tracking carrier performance, tracking on-time fulfillment as we've grown, those two are the biggest metrics, and that was entirely manual before Daasity. Any platform that we had seen to track them wasn't fully accurate, and so I was running those reports, which means I can't run them every day. I run them like every week or every 2 weeks when I have free time. And that meant that it was really hard to optimize or make other business decisions. Like, since we plugged in Daasity and started tracking that, we can run numbers to say that it's economically favorable to plug in shipping insurance because we know the percentage of boxes that have UPS errors.
That's really cool. So essentially, and by manual, I'm assuming like dumping the data out, running everything in Excel.
Yeah.
So okay, so you're able to analyze it and then understand that based on the shipping variability that, and I have two parts to this question. So one, to add in the shipping insurance. So then did the customers pay for that, or did you all pay for that? And how did that factor into like how you all made that decision?
We decided to pay for it ourselves on every box shipped so that our customers would have a better experience. We were able to look at the data to say on what percentage of boxes is there variability that causes a bad customer experience. And it ends up being like 2.4% on average, but it it bumps up and down by the month, just depending on all of the variables that carriers deal with. And we've seen in COVID that carriers have just been overwhelmed with e-commerce, and they've had worse shipping rates than in other years as a result. So we were able to look at that metric, and then we were able to look at sources of churn and tie those back to operations issues. And we said that as a brand, we should cover this to ease some of the customer concern around changing their buying behavior to switching to a frozen subscription product bought online. And the numbers work out because of that carrier error percentage, that if we're spending 3 or 4% on shipping insurance and we get this insurance on 2.4% on average that sometimes bumps up or down, that's worth it for us as a business. So we were able to run those unit economics based on the fulfillment data in the operations dashboard.
Yeah, that's really cool. I don't know that I've heard many brands think about things that granularly, but a long term and especially at scale, I'm assuming that's going to, well, I'm not assuming, based on math, it's going to have some really meaningful impacts on the brand and on the bottom line. So that's really cool. So what other impacts would you say that once you started really diving into your data and leveraging it, it's had on the brand? I know that was very operational focused.
Yeah, I think the biggest impact has just been my time spent running detailed analysis in Excel and checking my own math, and the ability for the other team members to check a dashboard instead of asking me for a report. That has just helped us move more quickly and change some of our internal processes to do weekly business reviews with more metrics that are useful. We've made specific changes on operations in terms of like how we act on the fulfillment side and how it affects that carrier performance. And so we've been able to make changes around like not shipping on Thursdays, because we saw that when we shipped on Thursdays, that error rate went up. And tracking the like some specific metrics around like days between order placed and fulfillment, so we can make sure that we're on time fulfilling as many orders as possible. We've also made changes on the engineering side, on the marketing side. And I think as we get more accustomed to Daasity, we'll integrate other teams like CX into the dashboards as well. But we've made at least a dozen business decisions based on the data that I think prior to Daasity would have had to be really manual Excel spreadsheet number crunching for me to just get the same data.
Yeah. And then you kind of become the data bottleneck, and then the rest of the team, and it becomes that back and forth. So two things I want to dive into is no shipping on Thursday. Like, is there a reason that came out of that? Or it was just like, we just noticed this trend that whatever happens on Thursday, it's just a bad day to ship?
We found that the shipments that sent out on Thursdays had the longest delay for UPS, and it was significantly longer than other days of the week. So a large chunk of Thursday shipments get held up over the weekend, even if you're buying 1 day or 2 day shipping. And if it gets held up over the weekend for us as a frozen company, that means that it doesn't deliver to the customer within a window of time when it's still frozen. So we were able to look at that data and just say, let's eliminate Thursday days, work longer hours on Monday through Wednesday, and avoid all of those reships.
That's so fascinating. All right. Well, I guess UPS got to look into whatever is going on at their warehouse on a Thursday. So how do you see those types of decisions ripple out into the greater organization? Like, obviously customer experience is always really important, but are there any metrics that you're using to measure the impact of those types of improvements outside of things like reships?
Yeah, I mean, our core metrics as a business we're a subscription. So anything that affects LTV and churn, those are core metrics for us that all of these other decisions boil into. And then anything that affects gross margin. And so if we just look at LTV and churn and gross margin at a top line level each week, you can tell directionally which way it's going, but being able to dig in and say, okay, gross margin is going down not because our COGS are increasing on a per unit basis, but because our reships are going up. That has been really helpful, because then we can focus in on a few specific actions that our team and our fulfillment center can take and track whether it goes up or down. But I would say that like LTV, CAC, churn, and gross margins are like the most critical metrics as a business right now. And as a growing team, as we add in more and more people at different layers, like not just VPs and directors who are comfortable digging into the data, but associates and like new CX hires, giving those people very actionable insights to say, stop doing this, no more Thursday shipments, and then we can track what happens. That's been huge, because they aren't going to look at gross margins and be able to know how it affects their day-to-day actions.
Definitely. And also coming at an idea like just don't ship anything on Thursday has to have some pretty good justification and evidence behind it. Cause I would say it's a pretty atypical business decision for most e-com brands. You think like, get it out. But it's really interesting to see, and it's cool to see the impact. So I think that also tees me up perfectly for my next question of, as the team has joined and as new members have taken on new roles in the company, how have they been leveraging the data? How have they been using it to make better decisions?
Yeah. So we do a weekly business review every week on Fridays, where each department leader, which we have a team of 7, so it's most of the team, presents on the core KPIs for their group, whether it's marketing, engineering, operations. I do sort of the admin, like top line numbers, and every team member attends that meeting. So as we've added new hires on marketing or CX, those are the teams that we're growing the fastest. They attend those meetings and get to see the most important metrics to the business. And we've had a number of people join and think about how the organic conversion rate presented in the marketing slide affects what they should be thinking about on social, and then ask better questions for themselves. And right now, most of the new hires just look at the data. But I think as we continue growing, giving them access to run reports themselves will be great, because that, again, like takes some of the reporting work off of us and gives them ownership. So they're thinking about it even more readily on a daily or weekly basis.
Yeah, that's so cool. So I'd love to dig more into that Friday meeting. So how many teams are there? And then what would you say are the usual or average number of metrics that each team tracks?
So we really only have 4 or 5 teams. We have operations, product, which is a digital product team, and engineering, marketing, and CX. So I guess 4 teams in total, and 7 people in total. So it's a small, scrappy startup team. And each of the teams is probably tracking between 5 and 10 core metrics that they think about differently. And having all of those teams be able to report on metrics that we can trust, instead of hearing like CX reporting on like number of tickets per customer. In order to report that metric, they need to know the number of subscribers we have this week. And in order to pull that, we all need to be looking at the same number of subscribers metric. In the past, that was reported in several different platforms, and you'd have to be really on top of it, like at the edge of your seat, to make sure that everyone has the same number on their slides. Because if they're not, then they're looking at dirty data, and the metric they presented is actually potentially like directionally entirely off, which we've seen in the past. So each person's reporting 5 to 10 metrics, and the whole meeting takes about half an hour.
Wow. Wait, 4 teams presenting 5 to 10 metrics, and that means only a half hour? Wow, you are really, really efficient. Okay. I'm going to take some notes and figure out how we can do that at Daasity.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's all really interesting. How would you say that's translated and changed how the team operates now?
Yeah, I think that it definitely trickles into everything we do around like sprint planning and the priorities for each team, because before we had this data and this meeting cadence, we would look at like what the company needs to get done before our next financing, or what we need to get done this quarter, and basically have a to-do list. But tying it back to the data helps us say, like, the CX team is seeing more tickets, and the tickets are rising on this question, like, where's my order question? So what can the engineering team do to directly counteract that? Because if tickets about that rise, then our costs overall rise, and that affects this like Q1 metrics that we've been tracking. So having everyone in one meeting looking at the data helps the teams collaborate better, to say it in like the simplest way, but it helps us like get out of silos. And even as a 7-person company, like without those data points, you do kind of fit into a silo, because CX isn't going to bug engineering every time they see a "where's my order" question to say like, what can you do about this? But having everyone look at the data makes everyone think like, what can my department do to help that department, even though my department is just me.
Yeah, it's fascinating that it's like everybody has their own priorities, but that like this process and the data allows everybody to have those discussions where it's like, oh, well, we're going to do that anyway. Why don't we just combine it with this other project to make it more efficient? Because, yeah, I mean, for a team of 7, it sounds like you all are getting a lot done. So,
Hopefully. Yeah.
um,
And we also see like, this is a slightly different way of answering the same question. Like, we are running experiments constantly, right? On marketing, we're running experiments on creative and on audience segments, and on engineering, we're running experiments on the LP and the PDP verbiage. And so if we're running those experiments and looking at one metric, like on marketing, we're just looking at CAC and maybe looking at LTV. But then engineering sees that the conversion rate's like plummeting. We can easily tie those two conversations together and say like, okay, did we make any other changes, or is the audience the thing that's driving the conversion rate change? And get people to really collaborate on like root cause analysis behind different metrics they're looking at.
interesting. For anyone who isn't familiar, can you just go into what root cause analysis is real quick?
Yeah. So basically, root cause analysis is a way that we think about problem solving, to not just think about the symptoms that we're seeing, like conversion rate is getting worse on mobile, but to find the actual cause and eliminate variables. So that's really important for us, because we're making so many changes all at the same time, and we need to know which one is helping us and which ones are hurting us. So we do root cause analysis to say like, conversion rate is getting worse. What could be the cause? Think about all of the changes that may have driven conversion rate changes, and then eliminate them one by one to find the actual core change we made that caused the problem, finding the root cause.
Yeah, definitely. It's I like to always think about like if you ever wanted to be a detective or a doctor but didn't want to go through med school and everything. It's a great way to
Yeah.
like have that same kind of process of looking through everything.
Yeah. Like
So
forensics of a D2C.
yeah, just so many different dials and things to optimize. So what would you say is really the through point of like, is there any metric or is there any part of the team that you all track that has become more efficient or has opened up new opportunities by instilling this process in the company?
That's a good question. I think that I think a number of things have become more efficient. Like the data bottleneck has been the biggest stepwise change that we've seen. And I think like we've seen a dramatic shift in how each team member thinks about their to-do list, because they're looking at metrics instead of like getting a to-do list handed by me. They get more ownership over it, and they can do the strategy thinking themselves in a way that like pre-Daasity, though we wish we had, and we probably thought we had to some extent. I was like always the checkpoint on whether people were working on the right priorities, because people didn't have like a very accurate picture of how their actions affected other departments.
Ooh, that's perfect. I think I want to pull that as the like highlight clip.
Okay, cool.
Okay, this one completely off script. If it works well, awesome. If not, what is one thing that you wish you had with Daasity that maybe isn't available right now, but would unlock just a great opportunity for the company?
Oh, well, I wish that I could do some of the same reporting and analysis on my actual unit economics and COGS, which may be like way outside of Daasity's ideal roadmap, because it goes into like an ERP system basically. But if I could look at charts that said like the price of this raw material went up or down, or like your actual unit economics that you experienced changed this week versus last week, that would be huge for our business, because that's like the last remaining black box that we see. And then the second one is our customers contact us on so many different channels. We try to meet them where they are. So we're available on Instagram DM, Facebook Messenger, SMS, email. We have a chat tool on our website, and pulling those metrics in and pairing them with the customer data would be really interesting to look at the same like lookalike audience that we're pulling from a reporting perspective on Daasity and say like, which customers are the easiest to serve and which customers are like the hardest to serve and the most likely to churn. And maybe we could use that data to change some of our CX processes.
Anything that we missed? Anything that I should have asked that I didn't? Or anything that's just interesting that's come up as a part of this process and is like unique or something that didn't happen in the company before?
I think one other thing we haven't talked about is like having a common vocabulary, which we've hired people from some great startups. We've hired people from D2C, from like B2B SaaS. We've hired people from no startups, like from food companies. And there was not a common vocabulary because we're not only like people with different vocabularies ourselves for what metrics are called, but we're looking at tools that call them different things. And putting people in one dashboard and agreeing on like our vernacular as a team has been huge because it just takes out a lot of the like communication gaps and the time spent explaining exactly how I calculate this metric and how you're talking about a metric called something different, but I think you're talking about this metric. And we have to get into the weeds so much. But having a common vocabulary has been huge for us.
Yeah, I love that. I always like to refer to like the team dashboards as like a campfire where everyone can sit around and have like a common conversation around. So that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anything else that you want to share or anything cool going on? Anything cool going on at the brand that people should know about?
Ooh, we have heard again and again that our customers, like our team, really care about sustainability. So we're launching some new, more sustainable packaging. Our current stuff is recyclable and some of it's compostable, but we're coming out with like everything is curbside compostable, and some exciting stuff is coming this summer.
That's very exciting. Always love when always love when people solve the ecom sustainability problem. So want to
Yeah.
thank you. Really appreciate the time, Katie. It was great to learn more about Maev and really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much.